It started with a low rumble under the eaves of the old duplex garage, the kind of sound you only notice when it doesn't belong. For months, the space had sat empty except for a few lawn tools and an old freezer. The lease agreement with the county sheriff's department was still active, but their new patrol unit hadn't yet moved in. I had spent the winter repairing doors, repainting trim, making sure everything would be up to code when they did. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept the property steady and legal. By early spring, the lot looked sharp, concrete swept, oil stains scrubbed out, big aluminum roll, up doors balanced, and greased so they glided open with a finger's push. I even had a new security camera mounted under the eaves to feed directly to my phone. The garage sat at the end of a gravel lane behind my main house, bordered by an overgrown hedge and a sagging wooden fence that marked the edge of my neighbor's lot. That neighbor, a middle-aged woman with a talent for confrontation, the type viral channels label Karen, had a reputation. She chaired the neighborhood beautification committee, monitored everyone's bends on trash day, and held forth at HOA meetings about everything from mailbox height to appropriate holiday decorations. She also had a rotating cast of vehicles, a silver SUV, a green pickup, and occasionally a boxy delivery truck that blocked the street when she unloaded yard sale fines. None of that was my business. Until one Friday evening it became my business. I came home from town just before dark. As I turned down the gravel lane, my headlights swept across the garage and caught two unfamiliar trucks parked nose to nose inside, filling both bays. Big late model pickups, one white, one black, both splattered with mud. Their tailgates were down. The garage lights glowed overhead, though I'd left them off that morning. For a moment, I thought the sheriff's unit had moved in early. Then I saw the plates not county, not official, just private tags from a neighboring state. The sight stopped me cold. Those bays weren't public parking. They were under a written lease to law enforcement. Even if empty, they were off limits to anyone else. My property, my insurance, my liability. And now two big trucks sat there like they owned the place. I eased my vehicle forward until my headlights lit the interior. No one was visible. No movement behind the windshield, no voices. Just the low tick of cooling engines and the faint smell of gasoline. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, pulse climbing. Trespass wasn't new in this neighborhood. People cut across yards, left bikes on porches, but driving two full-size pickups into a locked garage without permission was a different level. I checked the roll-up doors. Both had been left unlatched. The padlocks I normally clipped through the handles hung loose, shanks open. Someone had opened them from the outside, rolled them up, and driven in. Either they had a spare key to the side door or they'd pried the hasp. My security camera faced the driveway, but not the door handles. The little red recording light glowed steadily. Whatever had happened was on video. The air inside the garage was warm and smelled of damp earth and oil. The trucks loomed like animals in a barn. Mud clumped off their tires onto my clean concrete, a length of rope coiled on one tailgate. In the corner where the sheriff's department had planned to install a radio charger, a styrofoam cooler sat dripping meltwater. I backed out slowly, heart hammering. This wasn't a case of a neighbor accidentally pulling into the wrong driveway. This was deliberate. Someone had used my locked facility to store two large vehicles. For how long and why? I drove up to the house and watched from an upstairs window. After a few minutes, a familiar figure appeared, my neighbor, the Karen of our area, walking briskly down the lane with a clipboard under one arm. She glanced up at my window, then slipped between the trucks and began unloading boxes from the cab of the white one. She stacked them against the back wall like she was arranging a storage unit. When she finished, she closed the roll-up door but didn't latch it. She walked away toward her own yard without a backward look. I exhaled slowly. So it wasn't a mystery stranger. It was her. She had simply decided my garage was hers to use. The lease with the sheriff's department flashed through my mind. Their patrol unit was scheduled to move in next month. If they showed up to find 2 unknown trucks inside, it would be on me. Worse, if anything illegal was in those vehicles. Stolen goods, hazardous material. It would be my property that housed it. I went down to the kitchen, pulled out the lease file, and reread the clause about exclusive use. It was clear. No other party could occupy or store property in the space during the term of the lease. Even though the department hadn't yet moved in, the agreement was active. I was responsible for maintaining security. Any breach was a breach of contract. The glow of the security camera feed on my phone drew my eyes. The recording showed exactly what I had seen. 2 trucks driving up the lane at 3:12 p.m., my neighbor stepping out to guide them in, the doors rolling up, the padlocks dangling. No hesitation, no permission asked. Just straight into the bays. I saved the clips, backed them up to a hard drive, and labeled them by date. If this turned into a dispute, evidence would be everything. As darkness deepened outside, the garage lights blinked off, probably on a timer. The 2 trucks sat silently, hulking shapes behind the roll-up doors. The lane was empty. No sign of my neighbor. The property was quiet except for the soft whir of the camera. In that moment, I understood the pattern. This wasn't random opportunism. This was exactly the kind of entitlement that viral property, drama channels feed on. A person so sure of their own authority, they'll invade someone else's space without a second thought, convinced they're in the right. And me, the rogue property owner, left to clean up the mess. I locked my house, set a second camera pointing out the window, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. If Karen had parked 2 trucks in my garage without asking, she'd done it for a reason. Maybe she was hiding them from someone. Maybe she just wanted free covered parking. Either way, the sheriff's lease gave me a lever she didn't know existed. Outside, the night settled thick and still. Somewhere beyond the hedge a dog barked, then fell silent. The trucks remained, hulking in the dark like a secret waiting to be exposed. That was the moment a plan began to form. Morning light came up over the hedgerow like a searchlight. Dew clung to the gravel lane, and the aluminum doors of the garage glimmered faintly. From my upstairs window, I could see the faint outlines of the 2 trucks inside. Nothing had moved overnight. My neighbor's house sat still and closed, blinds drawn. A paper from the HOA committee stuck out of her mailbox, damp from the dew. The quiet had that brittle feel of a calm before a storm. I started the coffee and opened my laptop. The first order of business was to catalog everything from the security cameras. Each clip, each timestamp, each shot of the license plates. The footage from the previous afternoon was crystal clear. The 2 trucks turning off the street without slowing, her hand on the garage door handle, padlocks left swinging. The whole operation had taken less than 2 minutes. No hesitation, no glance toward my house. She had assumed she was untouchable. I created a folder marked Garage Trespass, Date, and saved redundant copies. The sheriff's department's lease folder went on the desk beside me. Reading the terms with fresh eyes, I saw how much power it gave me. The county had exclusive rights to the bays. My role was essentially caretaker. That meant any unauthorized use wasn't just trespassing on my property. It was an unauthorized intrusion into county leased space. In other words, she had unwittingly parked her trucks on law enforcement's turf. The thought steadied me. I wasn't powerless. In fact, I had the upper hand. All I needed was patience and a paper trail. By 9 o'clock, the neighborhood stirred. Lawn mowers growled. A delivery van clattered down the street. Through my window, I caught movement. By the garagey, my neighbor again, clipboard under her arm, walking briskly. She slipped through the hedge as though it were her own gate. When she reached the roll, up door she produced a small key, opened the side entrance, and disappeared inside. Moments later, the garage door rattled up, and she began unloading more boxes from the white truck. Household items, plastic tubs, maybe merchandise. She stacked them neatly against the wall. The black truck stayed untouched. She closed the door, but again left the padlock dangling. Then she hurried back toward her yard, without a glance at the camera above the eaves. Watching her, I felt a strange detachment. It was like seeing a wildlife camera catching a fox stealing chickens. She was so sure no one could stop her that she left evidence at every step. I wrote the time and her actions in my notebook. When the sheriff's patrol unit arrived next month, they'd have a complete timeline of unauthorized use. But waiting a month wasn't ideal. There was risk every day those trucks sat in the garage. What if they contained something illegal? What if she claimed a right to be there? The more I thought, the more obvious it became. I needed to put the sheriff's department on notice now, before things escalated. I picked up the phone and called the administrative desk. The deputy who handled facilities knew me by name. I kept my tone calm and factual. The bays were currently occupied by 2 unknown vehicles, captured on my security cameras, without my permission. The lease was active. Would someone like to come take a look? He didn't hesitate. He said he'd send an officer by later that day to assess the situation. His voice carried that clipped edge law enforcement gets when something smells off. I hung up, exhaling slowly. That call had changed everything. I had shifted from a private dispute into a county matter. Whatever happened now would have a case number attached. By mid-morning, the sky clouded over, casting the lane in gray. I stood at the kitchen window watching. At 11:15, a county cruiser turned onto my street, lights off. It rolled slowly up the gravel and stopped short of the garage. A uniformed deputy stepped out, scanned the doors, then came to my porch. I handed over the lease and the flash drive of video clips. He nodded, brows furrowed, then walked back down to the garage and tried the side door. It opened easily. He peered inside, spoke into his radio, and waited. Another car arrived. This one a plain sedan with a badge on the dash. The two conferred quietly. They took photos of the trucks, plates, and the boxes stacked inside. Then one of them rolled the doors shut and clicked my padlocks into place. When they came back to the porch, the deputy's face was neutral, but his tone left no doubt. The vehicles were being held until the rightful owners could explain why they were in a county leased facility without authorization. As soon as they left, the reality hit me. I had just turned my neighbor's secret parking spot into an impound lot under the sheriff's jurisdiction. Any move she made now would go through them, not me. The power dynamic had flipped. From the upstairs window, I kept watch. The garage doors gleamed with fresh padlocks. The trucks were still inside, but now under official hold. A small evidence tag fluttered from one handle. My neighbor's blinds stayed closed. All afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed. People slowed as they passed. Someone posted on the community app about police at the old garage. Speculation swirled. I stayed quiet. The less I said, the stronger my position. Just before sunset, her front door opened. She strode down the lane, hair pulled tight, phone clutched in one hand. She went straight to the garage and tugged at the door. The padlock held. She tried the side entrance. Locked. She rattled the handle, stepped back, and stared at the evidence tag. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, the way an animal freezes when it realizes the trap has closed. She spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, punching numbers into her phone. Minutes later, a silver SUV, one of her fleet, rolled up and parked out front. A man got out, glanced toward the garage, and followed her inside. Curtains twitched. Lights flicked on and off. The drama had moved indoors. I sat at the kitchen table, writing it all down. She would almost certainly try to frame this as a misunderstanding, maybe even threaten legal action. But the lease, the footage, and the deputy's involvement meant the facts were on my side. If she wanted her trucks back, she'd have to go through the county. And the county had no reason to be lenient. Night came down thick. The garage sat silent under its security light, looking less like a barn and more like an evidence locker. I locked my doors and set the cameras to high resolution. Whatever happened next would be caught on tape. For the first time since finding those trucks, I felt something close to calm. The risk was no longer mine alone. The sheriff's department was involved. The vehicles were secured. All I had to do was keep my record straight and stay out of her way. Still, a part of me braced for retaliation. People like her didn't back down easily. She had treated my garage as her personal storage without a second thought. Now that the trap had sprung, she would scramble to justify herself. Tomorrow would bring a new round of moves. As I closed the blinds, I caught one last glimpse of her house. Lights glowed in every window. Shadows moved back and forth. The neighborhood had shifted around me like a chessboard. I was no longer just a property owner. I was a player in a game of leverage, evidence, and consequences. And this was only the opening gambit. The following morning, the neighborhood app was on fire. Half a dozen new threads popped up overnight with titles like "Police at the Old Garage" and "Anyone know why there are trucks impounded?" Screenshots of my driveway security camera, zoomed, cropped, and captioned, floated around with wild speculation about drug busts, stolen goods, or militia activity. I didn't post a word. Silence was a shield. Every click and whisper only tightened the pressure on the person actually responsible, my neighbor. At 8 a.m., a county pickup pulled in. 2 deputies entered the garage, clipboard in hand. They took inventory of the boxes, photographing serial numbers on the equipment stacked against the wall. They didn't move the trucks. The vehicles remained where she'd parked them. When they left, one deputy hung a laminated notice on the roll-up door. Evidence hold, do not enter without authorization. It was official now. No one could mistake the status of those bays. Across the hedge, her curtains stayed drawn, but the silver SUV parked out front. Mid-morning, a different car arrived, a black sedan with a magnetic sign for a local neighborhood property consulting firm. Out stepped a man in a suit carrying a leather briefcase. He followed her inside without knocking. For an hour, nothing moved. Then the 2 emerged, walked straight to the garage, and began taking photos of the evidence tag. The man jotted notes furiously. She gestured at my house, at the sign, at the doors, pacing back and forth like a general surveying a battlefield. From behind my upstairs curtain I watched, phone recording in hand. They didn't try the locks. They didn't speak to me. After a few minutes, they returned to her house and shut the door. A new post appeared on the neighborhood app, almost immediately. Garage owner unlawfully seizing property. The text claimed she had long-standing permission to store equipment there, and that misunderstandings with the county were being sorted out. It was signed with a username I didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. She was trying to flip the narrative. The tactic was classic so doubt, present herself as the victim, cast me as the aggressor. In HOA circles, it's practically a playbook. But the difference here was that my evidence wasn't rumor or memory. It was time, stamped video, a signed lease, and deputies on record. The harder she pushed, the more brittle her story would look. Around noon, a uniformed code enforcement officer arrived. He walked the property line, measuring tape in hand, photographing my hedges and driveway. When I stepped onto my porch, he handed me a courtesy notice, citing alleged overgrowth encroaching on the lane and proper signage. I recognized the move immediately. She had filed a complaint hoping to bury me in nuisance citations. I accepted the paper without comment, filmed his departure, and went back inside. At 2 p.m., a sheriff's detective called. The trucks had been run through the system. Neither was reported stolen, but both were registered to shell companies at post office boxes. One box belonged to a defunct landscaping service. The other had no current address at all. The boxes inside the garage were unmarked except for coded stickers. Nothing overtly illegal yet, but everything just suspicious enough to warrant a full look. He advised me not to touch anything and assured me the county was handling it. The news steadied me. Her version of events, that she had permission, would crumble under scrutiny. She wasn't just parking family cars. She was storing commercial equipment tied to phantom companies inside a county-leased facility. Whatever excuse she offered wouldn't survive contact with actual investigators. Late afternoon brought a knock at my door. It was a reporter from a local online outlet, microphone clipped to her collar. She asked if I'd comment on the garage incident. I declined, simply stating that the property was under an active county lease, and any further questions should go to the sheriff's office. She nodded, took photos of the evidence tag, and left. Within an hour, the story hit their homepage under the headline, "Mystery Trucks Seized from Private Garage Under Sheriff's Lease." Across the street, my neighbor's blind snapped shut. The black sedan was gone. Only her silver SUV remained, parked slightly crooked as if abandoned mid-thought. The app threads went into overdrive. Screenshots of the article spread. Some commenters cheered the property owner protecting his rights. Others speculated about a power grab by the county. The drama had jumped from our sack to the wider internet. Evening fell with a thin mist. I walked the perimeter of my property, checking cameras and locks. The laminated evidence notice fluttered in the breeze. Inside the garage, the two trucks loomed, silent and inert. But now they looked less like a threat and more like trophies of a battle fought by paperwork rather than fists. Back in my kitchen, I laid out the code, enforcement notice beside my lease folder. It was transparent retaliation, but I wouldn't ignore it. I drafted a polite letter to the county inspector requesting a re-inspection and attached photos showing the hedge well within the property line. Then I emailed a copy to the sheriff's facilities manager so the harassment pattern was documented. At dusk, movement caught my eye. She emerged from her house carrying a thick folder, face set like stone. She walked directly to the garage, stared at the evidence tag, then at my cameras, then back at the tag. She pulled out her phone and began taking photos of every angle. When she finished, she stood in the driveway a full minute, as if expecting me to come out and challenge her. I didn't move. Eventually, she turned and went back inside. Night dropped like a curtain. For the first time since this started, I allowed myself a small smile. Every attempt to intimidate me had become more evidence of her overreach. The more she tried to rewrite the story, the deeper she dug herself into an official record she couldn't control. I closed the blinds and set the phone on the table. Tomorrow would likely bring another wave, perhaps a formal HOA complaint, perhaps a lawyer's letter, perhaps more code citations. But the trap was already sprung. The trucks were under hold. The county was aware. The press was circling. All I had to do was keep my documentation steady and let the process unfold. Upstairs, the soft red glow of the security camera blinked like a heartbeat. Outside, mist beaded on the garage doors. Somewhere across the hedge, my neighbor plotted her next move. I pictured her at her kitchen table with her clipboard and legal pad, trying to frame herself as the victim, trying to rally allies. In the viral stories I'd watched, this was always the pivot point. When the Karen realizes the other party isn't just a random homeowner, but someone with a plan and leverage. I set my alarm early. Whatever came next, I intended to meet it with a clear head and a paper trail. Within a week, the drama jumped from the neighborhood app to an official agenda. A notice from the county clerk landed in my mailbox. A public hearing had been scheduled regarding alleged misuse of leased space at my address. It was couched in neutral language, but the implication was obvious. She had filed a formal complaint, forcing the issue into a quasi-legal forum where she could try to reclaim control. I spent the days leading up to it in quiet preparation. The garage remained sealed under evidence hold. Deputies came and went, inventorying boxes, photographing equipment, and checking the padlocks. They spoke little, but their presence radiated calm authority. Every time a cruiser rolled down the lane, neighbors peeked from behind curtains. The app threads had shifted tone. Less speculation, more open support for the guy with the sheriff's lease. Even so, I knew the hearing would be a performance. She would arrive armed with papers and indignation, and I needed to be ready with facts. I gathered everything: the signed lease agreement, security camera footage burned to multiple drives, a printed timeline of every intrusion with dates and times. I also included the code, enforcement notice, and my polite response showing the hedge within limits. Each document went into a binder marked Garage Incident. At the front, I clipped a photo of the evidence tag now hanging from the roll-up door. My goal wasn't just to defend myself. It was to make the pattern of behavior visible to any neutral observer. The day of the hearing dawned gray and wet. I drove to the county building early, binder under my arm. The hearing room was a bland rectangular space with low ceiling tiles, folding chairs, and a raised dais for the panel. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A flag drooped in one corner. Rows of plastic chairs held a scattering of spectators, mostly neighbors, a few reporters with notepads. The buzz of whispered conversation stopped when she entered. She came in like a politician, head high, blazer crisp, a small entourage trailing a man in a suit with a briefcase. The consultant I'd seen before, and two HOA board members clutching clipboards. She took a seat at the front row, flipping open a folder thick with papers. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes darted toward me, measuring. The panel filed in a county commissioner, a sheriff's facilities manager, and a neutral mediator. After a brief preamble, they opened the floor. She went first. Her voice was smooth, practiced. She spoke of community assets, long-standing understandings, and confusion about access. She framed the garage as a shared resource, and claimed she had been storing community equipment with tacit approval for years. She painted herself as a steward acting for the neighborhood's good, blindsided by a sudden overreaction. From the back of the room I listened, binder resting on my knees. Each phrase landed like a chess move designed to reset the board. If you didn't know the facts, you might almost believe her. But the panel's faces stayed blank, pens scratching notes. When she finished, the commissioner turned to me. I stood, walked to the table, and set the binder down. My heart thudded, but my voice stayed steady. Without rhetoric, without adjectives, I outlined the lease terms, the security footage, the deputy's involvement, and the fact that the trucks were registered to shell companies. I explained that the county already had an active evidence hold, and that I had invited law enforcement as soon as I discovered the intrusion. Each point I illustrated with a printed page or a still frame from the camera footage. I didn't speculate about motives. I simply showed the pattern. I unlocked doors, vehicles driven in, padlocks left dangling. The room was silent except for the click of the projector advancing slides. When I finished, I closed the binder and stepped back. The commissioner thanked me and asked the facilities manager a few clarifying questions. He confirmed the lease was active, exclusive, and that his department had not granted anyone else access. He confirmed the evidence hold on the trucks and the ongoing inquiry into their contents. The neutral mediator asked if either party had documentation granting permission to store vehicles. She shuffled papers but produced nothing signed. Her long-standing understanding existed only as her assertion. A low murmur rippled through the spectators. Reporters scribbled. One of the HOA board members whispered urgently in her ear. She sat rigid, eyes fixed on the table. After a brief recess, the panel reconvened. The commissioner stated for the record that the lease stood, the evidence hold remained, and any claim of community access was unsupported. He encouraged both parties to allow the investigative process to proceed without interference. The mediator added that any further complaints about hedges or signage would be handled separately under normal code procedures. It wasn't a formal ruling, but the effect was clear. Her gambit to paint herself as a victim had failed. The county wasn't taking her side. If anything, they were tightening the circle. I left the room quietly, binder under my arm. As I passed her row, she kept her eyes down. The man in the suit muttered into his phone. The reporters peeled off to the hallway to file stories. Outside, drizzle slicked the courthouse steps. I breathed in the cool air and felt some of the tension drain from my shoulders. One stage of the battle was over. Back at the property, the garage looked unchanged, but the laminated evidence tag now bore a fresh date and signature from the facilities manager. The deputies had been by while I was gone. Across the hedge, her curtains were drawn tight. No vehicles sat in her driveway except the crooked, parked silver SUV. That evening, the neighborhood app lit up again, but the tone had shifted. Instead of questioning me, people were openly criticizing the HOA for overreach. Someone posted a photo from the hearing room with a caption, "County backs leaseholder. Trucks still under evidence hold." Likes and supportive comments piled up. The narrative she had tried to control had slipped away into a tide she couldn't manage. I sat at my kitchen table and opened a fresh notebook page. Retaliation might continue. More code complaints, maybe even a civil suit. But her leverage was gone. The trucks were in custody. The county had spoken. Any further moves would look like harassment rather than defense. Outside, night fell softly over the lane. The security camera's red light blinked steady as a heartbeat. For the first time since discovering the trucks, I felt the balance of power shift entirely in my favor. But I also knew from watching countless viral stories that this was often when the cornered party acted out. The next phase could be quieter or it could be explosive. I closed the binder, shut off the kitchen light, and looked once more at the gleaming roll-up doors. The trap I hadn't even known I was setting had sprung, but the game wasn't finished yet. The morning after the hearing broke with a strange hush. For the first time in weeks, no trucks moved, no deputies rolled up, no inspectors appeared with clipboards. Only the slow hiss of sprinklers and the coo of pigeons on the roof. Yet the quiet felt brittle, as though something were about to snap. I made coffee and opened the neighborhood app. The top post now linked to the local news article about the hearing. The headline read, "County confirms leaseholders' rights in garage dispute. Trucks remain under investigation." Comments flooded beneath, residents sharing screenshots of my neighbor's old posts, piecing together a timeline, some even apologizing for assuming the worst about me. In less than a week, the public mood had swung from curiosity to outrage at the HOA's overreach. Screenshots of her at the hearing, mid-gesture, circulated with captions like, "When the receipts hit." It was the viral pattern I'd seen so many times. The self-styled enforcer exposed by paperwork. From my window, the garage stood silent, both bays sealed under evidence hold. Across the hedge, her blind stayed down. The silver SUV hadn't moved overnight. Yet the air felt charged, like a thunderstorm holding its breath. By mid-morning, a plain sheriff's sedan rolled into my driveway. A detective stepped out with a folder and introduced himself at the door. His tone was brisk but cordial. He said the county's legal team had reviewed the lease and confirmed it was airtight. More interesting, he added, the boxes stacked in the garage contained commercial power tools and landscaping equipment matching items, reported missing from a municipal storage yard 2 towns over. While the trucks themselves weren't listed as stolen, their cargo had raised serious questions. Until the investigation finished, the entire contents of both bays would remain sealed. I thanked him for the update, signed a statement confirming my timeline, and watched him drive away. Relief washed through me. Not only was I in the clear, but her secret had turned from a nuisance into a potential criminal inquiry. The same garage she'd treated like a private storage unit was now an evidence locker. The neighborhood app reacted almost instantly. Someone posted that the county is looking into theft. Others speculated about charges. Screenshots of the laminated evidence tag multiplied, tagged with emojis and hashtags. The more she tried to go quiet, the louder the crowd became. Early afternoon brought movement at her house. A moving truck backed into her driveway. Not one of the 2 under hold, but a rental from a national company. 2 men began carrying boxes out of her front door, loading them hastily. She appeared briefly, hair pulled back, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Even at a distance, I could feel the tension in her posture. She spoke quickly to the movers, gesturing toward the truck. They nodded and worked faster. From my upstairs window, I recorded it all. Each box stacked into the rental felt like a piece of a collapsing plan. The self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood had become the one packing up, under the watchful gaze of a half-dozen cameras. By 3 p.m., a deputy's cruiser pulled up across the street. The deputy approached the movers, spoke briefly, and walked to her front door. She came out holding papers, hands trembling slightly. They spoke on the porch. The deputy gestured toward the garage. She glanced up at my window, then back at him. After a moment, she nodded and went inside. The deputy returned to his car and left. Whatever he'd said, it seemed final. The movers closed the rental truck, latched it, and idled at the curb. She emerged once more, carrying a tote bag and that ever-present clipboard. She scanned the lane one last time, jaw tight. Then she climbed into the silver SUV and followed the moving truck out of the neighborhood. I stood at the window long after their taillights disappeared. The hedge rustled in a breeze. The evidence tag on the garage door fluttered gently. The sense of tension that had coiled around my property for weeks eased, leaving only a kind of stunned quiet. That evening, the sheriff's facilities manager called. He thanked me for my cooperation and said the county would be taking over the garage completely until the investigation concluded. They would post an additional sign and station a plain clothes officer nearby for the next few days, just in case. He also noted, almost in passing, that my documentation had been extremely helpful. After we hung up, I walked down to the garage. The air smelled of rain and cut grass. I ran a hand over the cool aluminum door. Behind it sat 2 trucks filled with evidence of a scheme I'd never invited onto my land. Yet somehow, by sticking to facts and paperwork, I'd turned an act of blatant trespass into a case file under lock and key. Night fell slowly. The security light cast long beams across the gravel. Somewhere a dog barked and was silent. My phone buzzed with a notification from the app, another thread titled, "Oh, President resigns amid investigation." A neighbor had posted a blurry photo of a resignation letter emailed to the board. No explanation, just a formal stepping down, for personal reasons. I set the phone on the table and exhaled. The saga that had begun with 2 trucks parked without permission was unraveling entirely. She had lost her power base, her position, and soon, perhaps, her freedom. The garage that had been her secret advantage had become the instrument of her undoing. Yet I didn't feel triumph so much as a quiet amazement at how quickly things had turned. Viral stories always showed the dramatic pivot. The moment entitlement met accountability. Now I was living it. Outside, the garage stood silent under its evidence tag. Across the hedge, her house was dark. For the first time in weeks, I heard nothing but crickets. But I also knew the story wasn't over. The trucks were still here. The county investigation was ongoing, and until it concluded, my property would remain a stage for the final act. I closed the blinds, made a note in my journal, and set the alarm early. Whatever Chapter 6 brought, I wanted to meet it ready. Weeks passed, but the garage remained under the county's control. The roll-up doors were still sealed with evidence tags, a small sheriff's office. "Do not enter," placard screwed into the frame. Deputies came at odd hours to photograph, to catalog, to collect items in numbered boxes. At first their visits stirred curiosity, but soon the neighborhood grew used to the quiet rhythm. My once ordinary outbuilding had become a long-term evidence locker. Across the hedge, her house stood hollow. The blinds were perpetually down. Mail began piling up on the porch until someone from the HOA retrieved it. The silver SUV never returned. She was gone, leaving behind only empty rooms and a board scrambling to appoint an interim president. The app threads continued for a while. Speculation about charges, memes about GarageGate, screenshots of news articles, then faded as the community moved on to the next topic. Inside my home, the silence felt different now. Not tense, but calm. Each morning I made coffee, looked out at the garage, and noted the date on my calendar. The lease with the county still had months to run, and the facilities manager reassured me that they would either extend it or release the space once the investigation concluded. In the meantime, deputies handled all security. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about trespassers, code complaints, or surprise inspections. The very lease she had tried to exploit had become my shield. One afternoon, a plain envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was a formal notice from the county prosecutor. Charges had been filed against several individuals connected to the trucks and their contents, including unauthorized storage of municipal property and attempted concealment of stolen goods. Her name appeared in the list. It was surreal seeing it printed in legal type, no longer just an antagonist in a neighborhood dispute, but a defendant in an active case. I set the letter down and exhaled slowly. I hadn't wanted this. All I had wanted was to use my own garage under the terms of my lease without interference. Yet by parking her trucks inside without permission, she had crossed from nuisance into criminal territory. And now the law was handling it. Later that week, the county held a brief press conference. A spokesperson confirmed that the property owner acted properly and in cooperation with authorities. Local news ran a segment showing the sealed garage from the street, blurred for privacy. Neighbors commented on camera about learning a lesson regarding assumptions. It was exactly the kind of viral clip that would rack up hundreds of thousands of views online. A simple homeowner quietly documenting everything while the self-appointed enforcer imploded. Even the HOA board seemed chastened. A new interim president sent me a polite letter acknowledging that my hedge was within code and that no further complaints would be filed about my property, pending normal review cycles. It was bureaucratic language, but I recognized the subtext. They were retreating. The culture of petty enforcement had lost its leader. Spring crept in. Grass greened, birds returned. The garage, still sealed, became less a point of tension and more a landmark, a physical reminder of how entitlement can backfire. Sometimes, when deputies stopped by, they chatted briefly, telling me without specifics that the case was moving along, and that my documentation had been invaluable. Each time they left, the quiet returned, stronger than before. Finally, on a bright morning 6 months after the day I discovered the trucks, a county vehicle pulled up and 2 uniformed officers removed the evidence tags from the garage door. They handed me a receipt confirming that all investigative materials had been cleared out and transported to a secure facility. My lease with the county was fulfilled. The garage was once again mine. I rolled up the door for the first time in months. The bays were empty, echoing. Only faint tire marks on the concrete showed where the trucks had sat. The air smelled of dust and cardboard. Sunlight slanted through the high window, turning the space golden. I stood in the middle of the floor and let the stillness wash over me. After everything. The trespass, the hearing, the viral speculation. The building was just a building again. That evening, I posted a short update on the neighborhood app. No gloating, just a photo of the clean garage and a caption. County has concluded its investigation. Space returned to owner. Within minutes, likes and supportive comments poured in. Neighbors thanked me for handling it with grace, and some admitted they had been quick to judge. One wrote simply, "Lesson learned. Paper trails matter." As dusk settled over the lane, I sat on my porch and watched the sky turn orange. Across the hedge, her house remained dark, for sale sign leaning in the yard. The silver SUV had become a symbol now, sighted occasionally in distant towns, but never here again. The HOA meetings reportedly had a new tone, more focus on actual maintenance, less on petty enforcement. Without her, the culture had shifted. I thought back to the moment months earlier when I'd walked into my garage and seen those trucks. If I'd reacted with anger instead of documentation, the story might have gone differently. If I'd tried to move them myself, I might have been accused of tampering. But by staying calm, by calling the sheriff immediately and keeping every receipt and video clip, I'd built an unassailable record. In the world of viral property dramas, that was the hidden key: facts over fury. Night fell. The security light clicked on, casting a steady beam across the driveway. Crickets chirped. The garage door stood closed but no longer sealed, waiting for my own tools, my own truck, my own quiet projects. The saga was over. Somewhere online the clips would keep circulating. Screenshots of the hearing, memes about GarageGate, think pieces about HO, and that's how the whole garage saga finally wrapped up. It still amazes me how quickly things can flip when you keep receipts and stay calm. If you enjoyed following along with this real, lifestyle OA Karen drama, do me a favor, tap the thumbs up so more people see it. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next wild neighborhood story, and share this video with a friend who loves a good property, writes Twist. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.